Hello, everybody. I don't know what I was going for there.
There was an attempt.
Yes, there was an attempt. It failed, partly because it was half-hearted. We are just doing our normal pre-stream check. Hello. There we are. It's working. Oh man, I was just trying to do a normal hello, and somehow I was like, I don't know. Have you ever heard of that Scott Manley guy?
No.
It's like, hello, Scott Manley here. You know, super Scottish.
Oh, I thought you were doing like a Russian accent.
No, no, hello.
Yeah.
Welcome to Hacking Stream. Today we hack your bank account. Odlichna. That's Russian for perfect. So, welcome, guys. Once again, Jacob is physically present in the same room as me.
In the same room.
Yeah, it's because Jake's in Melbourne again. We're having a bit of a debate over computer times. My desktop said it was 7:57, and Jake's laptop said it was 8 p.m.
Yep.
And I was like,
right.
Queensland time. But then, yeah, it turns out I needed to sync my time. I was 3 minutes out, so... Hello. It's a funny story. I know Benjamin Franklin. Not the Benjamin Franklin. It's a Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah.
Actually, his name's not even Benjamin Franklin. That name is a lie, which is ironic because Benjamin Franklin said he couldn't tell a lie. That's just a bit of trivia about... I've watched enough American cartoons to know that was a rumor about Benji Franklin. Old Benji there.
Good old Benny boy.
Benny boy. No, it was George Washington could not tell a lie. I'm completely wrong. My bad. Benjamin Franklin lied all he wanted. But anyway, said person behind that moniker once tried to do a northern sort of, hello, I'm from up north, sort of. I can't do it either. And instead he sounded very Spanish. So,
Spanish.
Yeah. It was,
okay.
So I've just about near enough doxed him. So what are we doing today, Jack?
Today we are answering random questions on the internet.
Well, by answering, discussing.
Yeah.
Neither of us are actually peasant.
We're
not peasants. We're not actually going to answer on the internet.
No.
We're just going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And you may think this is a low effort way of doing a stream, but I'm going to tell you that
you are correct.
Yeah, probably. I partly because it's, I think, interesting. We talk about stuff. It's getting near the end of the year. I mean, we'll keep streaming through, probably. Maybe except for Christmas Day, because that falls on a Tuesday, does it? Or is that Christmas Eve? So if it's Christmas Eve, stuff it. If it's Christmas Day, I'll be at one of those streams. I'll be in Queensland. So
this is true. One of those streams will be a co-stream from my place instead.
Yes. So we'll be hanging around up there. So that could be fun. So we thought we'd kind of go through a few questions on Stack Overflow. If you have any that you think are fun to answer.
The Security Stack Overflow.
Sorry, the Security Stackexchange.
Not the dev one.
Sorry. First there was Stack Overflow, and then, what's his name? Jeff. Was it Jeff? Yeah, Jeff. Jeff. I forget his last name. I remember his blog was Coding Horror.
Yeah.
And he said he was creating Stackexchange. No, sorry, Stack Overflow, and then the whole Stackexchange thing kicked off. So...
a bunch of them.
This is the security one. So we thought, there's some interesting questions here that might give us some points to talk through. Maybe it's interesting. Maybe you've got some thoughts on it as well. Sorry, is there a second comment there from Mr. Franklin that I saw?
Said, as usual.
Oh yeah, definitely as usual.
Yeah.
So this first question, how am I ever going to be able to vet 120,000? Yeah, I was air quoting. It's a great technique for a spoken medium is to air quote. No, but I thought by going vet, it kind of makes it clear, doesn't it?
It comes across.
How am I ever going to be able to vet 120,000 plus lines of composer PHP code not written by me? So I will read a bit of this until we kind of get the point. But I depend on PHP CLI for all kinds of personal and hopefully soon professional mission critical business logic. This could be any other language and the exact same problem would still stand. I'm just stating what I personally use for the sake of context. So we're not going to pass any judgment on the use of PHP.
No.
I mean, hating on PHP is almost a bit of a meme.
Yeah.
So there's really no point. If you use it, you use it, and hopefully you know what you're doing. Or you use that Facebook version of PHP, which is a lot better. I forgot what it was called.
I want to say Swift, but that's the Apple one.
Yeah, Swift is not PHP.
No, I can't remember what it's called.
To the furthest possible extent, I always code everything on my own. Only when absolutely necessarily do I, reluctantly, resort to using a third-party library. For some things, this is simply necessary. For example, email parsing and other very complicated stuff like that. For managing such...
I'll only code it myself unless it's very complicated.
What a bar. For managing such third-party libraries, I use Composer. It's a library manager for PHP. Fair. I use Pip for Python. There's NPM for JavaScript stuff.
There's NuGet for C#.
.NET stuff.
Yeah.
There's... Well, Java doesn't really have a nice ecosystem for it, but there is like Maven. So Maven, where all the packages are? There's a place where tons of packages. There's package managers. Sometimes you have to bring your own libraries and script up the build, but there's a way to do it in Java as well. And Go just has GoGet, I think.
GoGet.
So it uses the library manager in a practical sense is much nicer than manually keeping track of this and manually downloading zip files and all of that jazz. However, the most fundamental security problem still persists. I have no idea what this
installed
code contains. Actually, that's a good idea. What we'll do is he'll just say all the air quotes things. So let's run that again. However, the most fundamental security problem still persists. I have no idea what this...
Hang on, where are you up to? I was looking at chat.
You're fired. You're get out.
Installed.
Code contains. Nor do I know what is added or changed with every update. One of the library's authors because they've easily been compromised one day when my composer fetches updates. So the main point... Are
we going to stop and talk about it as we go, or are we just going to do the whole question?
So I think we've got the point. So his basic concern, if you keep on reading, he talks about how am I supposed to vet all of this code? Like, I've got all this code written by other people.
That he doesn't trust, and he wants some way of trusting it.
I don't even know how I'm going to make it for another vet round of my own code, let alone this 10 times larger one. So his main concern is to do with effectively third-party dependencies.
Yeah.
And he's right. This is a problem in Python.
It's a common problem across languages.
Java, even C, you're grabbing even static libraries. So you might have grabbed some DLLs or SO files. Well, the Linux equivalent of a DLL, I suppose, shared object. Yeah, SO shared object.
Yeah.
So you might have grabbed a bunch of those, or they come on your operating system. How are you meant to trust them? So he's tickling at a question that I think people don't like to ask.
Yep.
Because they don't like the answer.
Yep.
The answer is if you're willing to trust code written by other people, you just kind of have to take that step. There are steps you can take. So there are some solutions to this, which we'll get to, that can do some level of vetting for you.
Yeah.
But I suppose the first step is to understand by running code written by someone else, there is a fundamental risk, but the trade-off for that risk, because if you're taking a risk, there should be a clearly defined upside as well as a downside. So the downside is someone's written vulnerable code or malicious code. The upside is you don't have to write this. So whenever I do Python stuff, if I'm doing web stuff, I'm instantly installing requests. I'm not faffing about with URL lib, and that saves me a lot of time because requests is simpler than URL lib.
Yep.
I mean, I could write my own wrapper for URL lib that kind of does what requests does, and I think we did a stream where I kind of... What one was that? That was I forget which one it was. Not the thing to find all the secrets. But
it was a fuzzer.
A fuzzer, that's right.
Yeah.
But, we kind of want to not have to do that. So, you grab a library that does it for you. Or, what database object relational map is. That's a great example.
Yeah.
There are people who are very, very smart who go, I'm going to write code that can do all the heavy lifting for a database.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have a clue where to start. But that means I'm probably not qualified to review it. That's the next thing, is you can't conceivably review everything and hope to understand what it's meant to be doing.
Possible vulnerabilities, especially if, in the context of this question, he's saying that he uses third-party code when it's too complicated for him to write himself. So you would think, in the same sense, it's too complicated to understand and really...
At a micro level, you can go, hang on a second, he's using a vulnerable function. So if you were reviewing C code and you saw an S print or a mem copy or all of that other sort of stuff that you get in C, you don't have to understand the larger context to know there is a problem there.
Yeah.
You might not even be able to describe exactly how you could compromise it given the flow of data, but you'd know there's an issue.
Yeah.
And spotting malicious code buried deep inside other things, if you happen to find it, or you know what searches to do, if it's something obvious. But anyone clever is going to try and cleverly do it.
Yeah. Mask it.
And the big problem tends to come so there are three kind of problems here. The first one is someone writes vulnerable code and it never gets fixed.
Yep.
The second one is someone malicious creates a library in one of these package management systems that's very closely named to the legitimate one. It's a typo squat, or they use an underscore instead of a dash or something like that.
Yep.
And that's malicious. Or the third one is someone removes their library from the ecosystem. This happened with Node.js or with NPM years ago. It's a LeftPad. A guy decided he was done with it. He was sick of the license. So he pulled all his code. LeftPad was one of those things. And the people who manage NPM put it back because so much stuff relied on it. And they were really worried about someone else chucking in a malicious LeftPad library.
There's also the case sometimes where people write these packages and then malicious parties come along and buy the repositories, or they buy the code and then take over the repository or take over the plugin or whatever it happens to be and add their own malicious stuff. And people don't do their background research, I guess, and they just sort of trust that it's always been working in the past. So I've got no reason to think that someone else might have bought it for malicious reasons.
So some of the things you can do. So if you work in a company, so a larger company, they often use like Artifactory is a good example of a tool used to manage artifacts. I think there's some add-ons to that, like a tool called X-Ray, which will scan your artifacts and tell you if there's any. So researchers still go and look at all these libraries. Well, not all of them, but they, might get around to them. So any disclosed vulnerabilities in something, there are tools that will be able to go, yours are using this version of this library.
Yeah, NPM has that built in. Like when you NPM install, it will tell you a list of all of the dependencies, and if there's vulnerabilities, it'll count them out and things like that. And
then there's there's SNYK or Sneak.
I was going to say, I think it's
Sneak
or Sneak, whatever you call it.
Yeah,
it's an online one that you.
So Sneak's good for you basically send like your manifest file or your requirements.txt or your packages.json. Yeah, and it'll go and tell you what issues you've got with what.
You can point it at, like, if you've got public GitHub repos or whatever, it can just pull it itself. Things like that.
X-Ray as well, which is one by JFrog, but that costs $. And then there's some probably other open source tools for that, but that's called source composition analysis or dependency analysis. But also just having your dependencies in an artifact repository, so that the version you're getting, at least that if someone malicious takes control of the actual public version of it,
rather than taking the public latest version, you're using one that you have
taken and
vetted, if you like.
Well, and even if not vetted, at least you've taken your storing and that's what you're using. So if something gets hijacked, you're kind of immune to it, unless you happen to update your dependencies right at the point it was hijacked. So that's kind of the way around that. I mean, to a lesser extent, you can also pin versions of things, but that really, if a bad guy gets a hold of the dependency, they can just delete all the previous versions and I suppose force you to pull whatever version they have there. So that's not a guaranteed control, but there are ways to minimize this impact. Otherwise, again, it comes down to, like, there is a bit of a joke in the JavaScript world that all you're doing is stitching dependencies together rather than writing any actual code, because there's so much stuff in the JavaScript world. So there's something to bear in mind. But in general, it's a trade-off. You go, I'm saving time writing this functionality, or cost for having to get the right person in to build it. But the cost is I'm now running semi-trusted or untrusted code.
Yeah. And there's always got to be a degree of trust, and that's mostly based around...
And if you work in a company and your security guy says, no, you can't use external dependencies, he's not a very good security guy. Like, you know, they need to be able to have this sort of conversation and go, right, like, let's have a talk about how you get your dependencies. But in 2019, you can't write everything from scratch.
No. Would you say, in a larger enterprise environment, that a SAST or DAST tool might help in this?
I mean, they tend to be looking for SAST, definitely. DAST, I mean, I don't know, I've never seen DAST work that great. SAST, exactly. So static analysis and dynamic analysis. So static analysis is some tool that can parse your code, like looking for code paths.
I should have explained. I mean, I assume we're talking to security people.
And look for suspicious looking code that might be a vulnerability. Yeah. And DAST is dynamic scanning, so basically automated web pen testing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or fuzzing and stuff like that. So some SAST tools will go, oh, you're using this library, there's a vulnerability in this library, so Checkmarx does, but they effectively use I think it's called Whitebox. They outsource to another tool that does that, but they can't go into compiled code bases. So if your dependencies, like in Python land, and even in JavaScript, your dependencies are just more Python and JavaScript. In Java, in .NET, in I'm assuming Go and Rust and stuff like that, your dependencies are compiled.
Yeah, compiled code, yeah.
So,
and that's sort of where the difference is between these dependency checking. Oh, right, yeah, I'll leave it where you can see it.
No, all good. I was just are you really some more secure doing it in house? And well, that's another good point that Mr. Franklin raises is. You go and, let's say I was going to go and write a HTTP library from the ground up. I don't think I could do a better job than the people who wrote requests. I made a bold pronouncement the other day on a Slack I'm in that there's no such thing as a good dev because every dev has to take shortcuts and you know, there are people way smarter than me, way more talented than me, that understand much more about this than me. But everybody at the end of the day has to take shortcuts, especially in a corporate company context where you've only got so much time. And so you might start out with the best of intentions and find yourself quickly taking shortcuts. And that happens. So yes, you can't guarantee you're going to write more secure code. I mean, I'd say the same thing about AWS when companies go, oh, we don't trust using AWS. It's like, your core business, I was working at a bank and they said this. I was like, this place's core business is to move money around, not run a data center. Amazon Web Services core business is to run a data center. Yeah. So they're probably doing a better job
Who's going to do a better job at that?
Yeah. And you could say that with some of these dependencies. And admittedly, there are a lot of dependencies that probably are garbage. I mean, if I go to my GitHub and look at some of my older projects, GitHub will tell you about some vulnerabilities as well. And I've got projects riddled with them because I haven't updated them in 5 years.
Yeah.
So, you know, and there are crappy dependencies out there that'll always have issues. You know, it just depends on what you trust. But there's the mainstream ones. There's requests in Python and Java. There's Spring. I'm sure there's some .NET ones that are fairly common.
Yeah, like Entity Framework is basically one of those database wrappers, all that kind of stuff that almost every project that you make, like .NET devs will have a list of NuGet packages that they basically automatically install because they know they're going to need them.
But again, I would look at questions like this almost through an economic lens more than a security lens, because the security purist is going to go, no, write all your own stuff. And then on top of that, a security purist might even go, and if it's vulnerable, then at least it was your own fault. At least you did it to yourself and someone else didn't do it to you.
Right, yeah.
And from a purist angle, you can kind of go, okay, yeah. I'm taking responsibility for myself entirely. But from an economic lens, you just can't do that. Heck, I try and write code securely as I write it. I initially went through a phase of, I'll hack stuff together and then come back and make it better. And then I realized I wasn't coming back and making stuff better.
Yep.
So and this is where I would say, if you are deving stuff, at least where you know it's appropriate, and you learn this over time, or at least working in security and doing pen testing and security engineering and stuff, you learn the parts of code like auth logic, got to be careful about. Input parsing, you got to be careful about.
Yeah.
Loading a config file from the hard disk, who cares? Like, unless your attack vector is someone's just stuck something malicious in my config file, which could have happened because you've got a command execution vulnerability because you're not doing the right thing with user input.
Yeah.
But, I would always prioritize authentication and user input and then session handling and cookie handling and stuff over how you load a config file from a file system.
Yes, definitely. And
you kind of learn where to worry about stuff as you go. Right, yeah, let's move on to the next one.
Let's move on.
Okay, isn't OAuth, OpenID, Facebook Connect, and others crazy from a security standpoint? I think Facebook Connect is just OpenID.
Is Facebook Connect crazy?
Why don't you read this one out?
Okay, so this guy works with APIs all the time, web developers, people who insist on OAuth, OpenID, etc. They're far superior from homebrew methods. Fair enough. Every site seems to be using these as well for ease of use to their user, but also for security. I hear it every day almost. It's more secure. Yep. But I find it extremely hard to believe for these reasons. If a hacker gets a password to one site, they now have access to all the sites. Hack all the things.
Yes.
It makes phishing 10 times easier. With so many people using the same login and doing it over and over again, people are far less likely to read everything and check every URL up top. Okay. All right. Could we list reasons why it's safe, or could you explain to me why it's more safe? What else has he got?
I think that's enough to get us going.
So basically, he's sort of saying, rather than having user accounts or connections per service, why do we trust that?
So I suppose a brief bit of history. Not so much OAuth, because I would say OAuth isn't really for federation. So one of the things here is this falls into the category of federation. Yes. SAML's another thing. If you work in a corporate with single sign-on, you might have heard of SAML. Yeah. Kerberos in a Windows environment.
Password reuse is definitely a factor here.
So OAuth is an authorization framework. So I like to think about the difference between OpenID and OAuth. Just as a quick explainer here before we jump into the rest of this question. OAuth is like a one-time, hey, you go to a hotel and you sign in and you get given a key. But that key doesn't say anything about who you are. It's just a key. So you could lose that key, someone else could pick it up.
It just says that you can access this room.
Whereas OpenID is meant to be more like OpenID, again, as well, is primarily an authorization framework. You authenticate to Google or Facebook or wherever. That's the authentication. And then the tokens you get back, OAuth and OpenID, are the authorization. So I'm allowed to go here.
Yep.
Whereas OpenID is a bit more like a driver's license. So at least it says who you are when you're going places. And even who signed this token. Although OAuth tends to just be used in the context of I've written my own API, I might generate OAuth tokens for people to access my own API. OpenID's kind of cross-provider. So I can write my app to use Google Auth. And then I just trust Google's tokens it issues. Or you can think about it, the local pub when you go to order a beer and they card you. Carding in Australia is where someone asks to see your driver's license to prove your age.
Yep.
They implicitly trust your driver's license because they go, oh, this is issued by Vic Roads or RMS or whoever.
Yeah. They trust that the government's put in the hard work to verify who you are.
Yeah.
So that they don't have to, basically.
Yeah. And therein lies the key benefit of these systems. Again, this comes back to...
It's kind of similar...
I'm just going to highlight this bit.
Method.
That's if you write your own authentication, like username and password, there is a lot of ways to mess that up.
Yeah. Companies like Facebook and Google and whoever else, you may not trust them as an organization, but they put a lot of effort into their security practices.
Well, there's that. you now no longer have to have registration functionality, password reset functionality,
It's all
MFA functionality. Like, it solves a lot of complexity for you. It also does reduce the risk of password reuse, because now, even though it's the same password, it's not replicated in a ton of places. So for me, I use my... I've got my own Office 365 subscription, so I federated that with a bunch of stuff, and then Google for some other stuff. I don't use Facebook, so meh. But oh, that's right. There was that. That was the other one. Was the guy who had lost his Facebook account that he sent. We'll get to that at the end. It's a skateboarding dog story. So.
But yeah, basically, this guy that's writing his own app, he doesn't need to know anyone's passwords anymore.
He raises a good point. So if you decided, I'm going to be an identity broker or an identity provider like Google is, if you just let people use a username and password to then log into a ton of other stuff, then he is correct. It's the same with, like, if you work in a large company that uses Windows and you can log into a lot of stuff without needing to type in a username and password. Behind the scenes, it's Windows integrated author Kerberos, or Landman or Login Manager. Oh, no, NTLM. That's one, NTLM. So if you got on their computer when it was left unlocked, you can probably do a lot of damage as that person. Which is why some stuff requires MFA and stuff like that. And that's the answer, is Google practically... I mean, you can have a Google account without MFA, but man, do they really push for you to have MFA.
Yeah, they do.
And then if they see you logging in after an impossible travel event, so a login from Sydney and then all of a sudden a login from Honduras, they're going to block the login from Honduras and give you an alert and say, type in this code the next time you log in. But MFA is the ultimate. And so all that risk is shifted to the identity provider to manage. The liability if something goes wrong at the end of the day is still on you, especially if you've got people's private data. Because you decided to go with that. But guarantee Google are going to do a better job of having a good authorization system than you are. Again, there is problems with phishing. I mean, Office 365 phishing attacks are really common these days.
They are,
Especially if you spin up your own SharePoint site, you get it to present a fake-looking Microsoft login form. And people will go, oh yeah, that looks like a Microsoft domain. And because of how confusing the domains are.
And even Azure itself, like, it's really cheap and easy and quick to spin up an app service in Azure. And by default, you've got a .microsoft.com domain hosted app that anyone dumb enough might fall for.
But a phishing risk is present anywhere. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter the website. Gmail and Microsoft stuff and Facebook are targeted far more often because they're big and there's tons of users. But there's tons of users. So if you know your kind of basic checks, which I'm going to say a lot of people don't, then generally you're fine. But again, anything's phishable. It's just whether it's worth it to an attacker. You could use Okta as an example for doing this, or you could use... So there's the Googles and the Facebooks where you don't have any control over how the user sets themselves up or whatever. That's all theirs. There are other services like Okta, Auth0, Cognito.
Cognito would go to that extent as well, I would say.
Where again, you don't have to write the logic to do this, but you can control what the login experience looks like. You can control how MFA works. You can control password policy. You
control complexity,
so that's
policies, all that.
Kind of like a halfway point, and that's what most corporates do. Is they might let consumers use Google Auth or Facebook Auth, but they wouldn't let employees use it. They'd use a product like that. Let's have a quick look. Multi-point. Someone doesn't matter how the hacker gets it. That's referring to your password. I'm not sure how to expand upon it exactly. The answer here, only use third-party services that really push people towards multi-factor authentication. Which definitely Google does. I don't have a Facebook account, so I don't know about Facebook.
No, neither do I. So I guess, the bit that he's got in bold there about it's either one password to access 1,000 servers is less safe than 1,000 passwords to access.
And that is true, but I would say what's worse is So this is one password really to access one service that gives you access to 1,000 other services.
Yes. Yeah. It's not quite.
That's your point where you can really make sure that login is valid. And again, Google seem to do a lot of effort in that area.
Yeah.
That's still better than one password that's replicated to 1,000 different services.
Exactly.
Which is how most people manage their passwords. So get a password manager. Point two, they all have a Twitter login. I trust the sites for the most part, so honestly, I don't check the URL or the pop-up window. So this question looks like it's 3 years old because some of these providers have moved on.
That. It's 8 years old.
Oh, wow. Active 3 years ago. Asked 8 years ago. So, yeah. So things have shifted a bit. So Google and Twitter and Facebook now all mandate full redirection to their login endpoints for authentication.
Yep.
OpenID, in fact, mandates that. So there are a bunch of login flow types. And the one that's commonly used is the auth code flow.
And even for the halfway between ones like Cognito, you set the allowed, almost like a whitelist. You whitelist the URLs that you say, if an authentication comes from this URL.
Yeah, a bit like Cause, right?
Yeah.
The referring sites.
It's similar to Cause in the way
Yeah.
that it allows who or what sites can and can't use that authentication form. If you
For point two, so that one's kind of less of a problem now because you don't have pop-up. PayPal still kind of does, but PayPal's play is around minimizing resistance.
Yep.
So for them, they made that trade.
Yeah.
People are so used to seeing the same login pages, they don't look anymore. But the other advantage is because everyone looks at the same login page, if there's something slightly askew about it, people might actually notice. Yeah. I would argue that any security control that relies around the uniqueness or the specialness or the trust in your thing as a security control, I would say maybe not.
It kind of goes back to that security through obscurity is not security.
I mean, you need to maintain that trust. Like I'm working on a project at the moment with domain names, and I did a blog post for the company I work for that one of the challenges is, of course, if you're in 50 domain names, that's now 50 things you have to protect because if any of them become a point of compromise, your whole brand can be trashed.
Yeah.
So why not just have one domain and one strong, unless you need to have split brands because, you've one company that does 5 very different things.
Yeah.
But if you're a bank and you go, the business bankers over here and the personal bankers over here and our special marketing campaigners over here, any one of those places screws up, you've just lost trust, the customer trust. So why don't you just have one domain and one brand that you put a lot of effort into keeping up to date rather than trying to manage 3?
Yeah, that's understandable.
Right, next one.
I think that.
Is there a way to add salted hashing to my user authentication without breaking my former login server?
Yes.
So this was asked 7 days ago. It's a recent one.
Yeah. And this is one that I've actually previously implemented. Yeah. So this is a fun one.
I am presented with the following scenario. I have a MySQL database or MySQL database. I say SQL, I don't say SQL.
I say MySQL, but I say
MS
SQL. MS SQL.
The table has 2 fields, username and password. The password is stored in an unsalted hash. So a bit of background there. Hashing is a one-way function.
Yep.
So I'd say deterministic. So for a given input, as long as the algorithm stays the same, you'll always get the same output.
Yep.
However, the output is not reversible. So it's a very complicated bunch of maths and cryptographic functions that, much like a checksum, but you take a cryptographic approach to generating a checksum, you kind of have a hash. However, hashes can be brute forced fairly easily because you just run through every possible input and you'll see a ton of outputs. There are databases with pre-calculated hashes. If you search for a hash in Google, sometimes you'll just get the actual original value because it's been cracked that many times.
Yeah.
Rainbow tables are another problem with hashing.
Yeah.
So salting, what that does is you add another element to the password that makes brute forcing the hash that much harder.
Yeah.
And that element could even get lost in the same breach as when the hash was breached. So in a breach, you could end up with a hash and the salt. The advantage is that now I need to know. Now my rainbow tables don't work because my rainbow table is predicated on no salts.
Yes. Yeah.
And now you're back to just plain old brute forcing. And if the password was strong,
it's all gone.
Yeah. However, so it's a 15-year-old app. A team was tasked to modernize these services by offering a new application following best practices and lessons learned. The application, so they're building a new app on top of a current database, which means they want to upgrade their auth. So this guy's saying, look, this contains PII. We should probably sort this out. So he's like, this means our database would get a third field salt, and the password field now stores a salt and peppered hash. I'd just say salted. The problem
they're actually going to do peppering as well.
What is peppering?
Isn't that when you do it after the hash as well?
Oh, okay.
So salt is added on before you compute the hash, and then peppering, I think, is when you add something again to the end of or like somewhere in the hash.
Okay. The problem here is that this will break the authentication in our old application, as the code is very much legacy. We don't have a working compiler for it anymore. Okay. So this bit I didn't read when I first looked at the question.
No.
So the old app has to keep working while they change the schema for the new app. Either way, kind of everything still stands.
I think, yeah.
So I suppose the approach to this, and Jake's already done this, so I'm going to take a stab, although I kind of already know what to do.
Yeah.
Effectively, you would just create 2 new columns in the table. So
in this case, yeah.
Yeah, 2 new columns. Because I think somewhere in there he says it's MD5. Is you would have a new column for like the whole salted and hashed, the salted hash of the password. And, that's probably got an updated hash in it. And then a column for the salt.
Yep.
So 2 new columns.
Yep.
What happens is in your new app, if there's, say, a 3-month crossover period, you would, in your new app, when the user logs in, you would validate their existing... So in your new app, you'd need 2 forms of password validation. The first one goes, right, they've got an existing password, but they don't have a new one. So actually all it would do is go, right, I've got this, I'll hash it into the existing format, dump it into compare it against what's in the table. It matches, great. Their existing password matches. At that point, you also have a copy of their unencrypted password.
Yes.
Because they've typed it in and you've just used it to generate the hash.
Yep.
You want to do it that way around and compare with the existing hash before you do anything else, because you still want to avoid time-based enumeration issues.
Yep.
Where now I can tell if you've got a new password hash or not. At that point, you would probably then you would salt that and generate a new hash and store that. The reality is salting's not enough. Because most hashing algorithms are designed to be computationally efficient.
Yeah.
So, well, not all, but a bunch of them. So SHA-256, all the SHAs, are designed to be efficient. You can implement them on ASICs or FPGAs for high speed. So to crack them can be done relatively efficiently. GPUs as well can crack them relatively efficiently.
Yep.
Whereas key stretching algorithms and Argon 2 and password-based key derivation and bcrypt, in fact, bcrypt and scrypt are the kings here, are designed to be inefficient and specifically are really inefficient on graphics cards.
Yes.
Because graphics cards don't have shared memory. So graphics cards may have tons of parallel, which means they're really great at doing SHAs.
Yeah.
But as soon as there's something that require them to be swapping stuff in and out of memory because they all need their own, it doesn't work. And that's, I think, what bcrypt and scrypt do, is they make it really inefficient to crack. And that's, again, an economic trade-off. It's making it more inefficient for you, the app writer, but your level of scale is different to your attackers.
Yes.
You might need to handle, I don't know, let's say 100 logins a minute.
Yeah.
They need to try and crack millions of passwords in a minute for it to be sufficiently economically viable for them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how you do it. You basically, once they've logged in and you've compared, you generate the new password hash, or then you hopefully using a good algorithm.
Yes.
If you really are going to hash yourself, do something like 10 or 20,000 rounds of hashing, rather than just the one. And don't put how many rounds of hashing you do in the database, because again, that makes it a bit harder for someone to... I mean, we just talked about security by obscurity, but if I've got your database, but I don't have your code, so I don't know how many rounds of hashing you did, that adds another step of complexity for a bad guy. All you need to do is make it not worth their time. You don't actually have to make it impossible. It's economics, again, unless you're specifically targeted, in which case, maybe there's nothing you can do. Originally, I'd assumed that they didn't have to keep the old legacy app running, so in most cases, what you would then do is delete the old hash.
Yes.
And just move to the new hash, and you're away.
And this is where there would eventually have to be some sort of crossover period, like you said. 3 or 6 months, and after that you just delete everyone's old password and force them to go through a password reset process. Yes.
Here, keeping a legacy app, again, same sort of deal. The challenge is you can't get rid of the original password.
Yes.
So there have been, I think someone had said this was one of the problems with the Ashley Madison breach, was that they updated all their hashes, but they didn't delete the column with the old hash.
Okay.
So it could be cracked, and then the account's broken into.
Right.
So you've got to manage that, and at some point delete the original hashes. So at some point they'd have to retire the legacy app.
Yes, definitely.
Or if they know it's going to be kept around for ages, make the difficult call of having 2 separate passwords. So new app, different password to the old app. Oops, let me get that. And that sucks, but depending on the sensitivity.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, especially if he's saying that there's PII in this app.
Yeah.
You'd want to do the best that you can to get rid of the old insecure hash as quickly as possible.
So keep in mind that while the old application is inherently insecure, it will not be accessible outside of our intranet. The new application, however, will be. Yeah. So I would also make it so that your new application, this is the tricky bit, right?
Well,
you've got to make sure that it can't be used as a source to try and brute force again. Well, brute forcing is brute forcing. It doesn't really matter because you don't know what the hash is. You're just guessing the password until yours succeeds. Yeah. So there's that, I suppose. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much that with that one, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Recommended policy on password complexity. This is one that, again...
Good old Ben asked us before we started streaming.
Is there any research on how a password's... And admittedly, this one's an obvious one. It's been discussed to death.
How old is it?
But we thought we'd discuss it. It's 8 years.
This is an 8-year...
As a concept. Yeah. As a concept, it's been discussed to death. But is there any research on how password complexity policy can increase or decrease the quality of passwords? If you don't have any requirements on the password, then probably 90% of users will use their name or something just as insecure. But they won't forget it. On the other hand, if you have a strong password policy, people might forget it. Obviously, they live in Europe. Just as you can tell, we live in Australia. So is there any documentation on how to create a password policy that helps users create passwords that they can remember but still sufficient complexity to them? Industry standard tends to be...
Well, I was going to say 8 years ago, things like... Well, the industry standards for password complexity would have been much different to what they are now.
Well, and things are kind of split into the consumer world and the corporate world.
Yes.
So in the consumer world, the focus is on reducing friction. So you still have 8 character minimums. And in a bunch of cases, not even enforcing much of a policy.
Yeah, I think the latest NIST standard is moving away from a lot of those enforced complexities.
So I did a bunch of maths on this. You could have a character, it's combinatorics, but you could have an allowed password character set of only lowercase symbols. But if your password was 100 characters long, it's going to be very difficult to guess. Even if that was a long sentence you could remember. Heck, even so there's that XKCD comic, and there was a bit of drama about
correct horse battery staple.
Yeah, there was a bit of drama around, but is that really useful? And from a mathematical perspective, both in terms of your alphabet is effectively 2,000 characters, even though a character is a word, and it's 4 words long, so you get it's trying to remember which way around it is. Benjamin Franklin will know with combinatorics.
Yep.
It's number of options to the power of the length. So
pretty sure that's it.
2,000 to the power of 4, which is a massive number. So if you had 100 to the power of 24, or 26, sorry, that's still a massive number. So I think the weaknesses there were the dictionary people used and the fact people still picked their own words, whereas you need to roll a dice. So that if you get 4 adjectives, you just get 4 adjectives, like blue, windy, red. I'm just trying to think of another adjective. Soft. Like, you know.
Yeah.
There you go. There's a password for somebody to use. So, you know, if you try and set up a reasonable sentences, you can build pattern predictions for them.
Yeah.
So I was talking to someone who's like, "Oh, I've got a pattern for my password. Therefore it's unguessable." And I was like, "But how many other people have that same pattern?
Yeah.
Or a similar pattern?" And then all the bad guy needs to do is go, "Well, I only need to guess in that pattern. I don't need to."
There only needs to be one breach where one person stores it insecurely, and it gets leaked, and then if it's obviously a pattern, like it's something to do with, I don't know, your username and the website that it was linked to, then it's obvious to an attacker that that's sort of your pattern, and from there they can replicate that across different sites.
Yeah. The whole point is, again, security by hidden information. So what is my system for generating a password?
Yep.
Is not great. Like, again, you could come up with passwords that never get breached, but the whole point is, and I think XKCD even said this with his system, is the method to come up with the system is known. The dictionary you use to generate your passwords doesn't need to be, and then use dice to find the words. Yep. Or good strong randomness.
Yeah.
Don't use math.random. So now onto, and so I would say that a good password policy can actually decrease the risk or increase the quality of the password. I mean, at the end of the day, just use a password manager.
Yeah.
1Password or LastPass. Because that simplifies a lot of this. You don't have to remember your passwords. Just remember the password to that, and then I remember my banking password and a couple of others if I'm ever SOL and I lose my password manager. Or I'm on someone's computer and I don't have it there and I can't open it on my phone to look at the password.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say, so interesting story about Enigma. So World War II, the Germans had this thing called Enigma, which was how they encrypted messages. It was shared keys, and you had a book, and you'd be like, right, on this day, we're sharing this key.
Yeah.
However, part of the challenge was they made the key generation process rules so convoluted, they reduced the key space. So if you think about it, and this is a tough one to get your head around, but if you had a 10-character password, minimum and maximum, it just had to be 10 characters. But absolutely no restrictions on how few or many other characters to use. So no complexity rules. That is where you have the maximum number of potential passwords. The challenge is human laziness means we're going to pick easy passwords that don't have any of that complexity in it. So there is a balance here. So if you force a capital, you actually reduce the total number of spaces. You remove all passwords that have no capitals in them from consideration.
Math.random is fine if the seed isn't known and the length is short.
Yes. There are... Math.random's not considered cryptographically secure, but depending on the context, like... this is where we walk into the realms of... It's not that hard to use cryptographic randomness because it comes with every computer. But Math.random itself is... you could probably use it and get away with it. I'm not saying you should, because there'll be contexts where it doesn't work at all.
Yeah, under the right circumstances, it can be considered predictable.
Yeah. So it works on it's a pseudo-random algorithm that uses a seed value, and it gives you random-like things. But on a Linux box, dev random's there, and as long as it's 30 seconds after your system's booted up for the first time, there will be so much entropy there that you're good to go. It's not that hard to grab a little bit of that for your randomness.
And so what you were saying about the Keyspace stuff, that's exactly where NIST and those other industry standards are going towards, where the fact that you're enforcing a minimum length and assuming that people use that minimum length, as soon as you introduce must have a capital, must have a special character, you're reducing the key space, like you said.
Well, statistically, you reduce it. And the other counterintuitive thing is from a human cognitive load perspective, you reduce it as well. Because now I'm just going to go, oh, it has to be this level of complex. What's the easiest thing I can think of that'll help me remember with those complexity rules?
Yeah.
And so you still get plenty of dumb passwords.
Yes.
O's swapped out for zeros.
Yeah.
A capital letter at the start, maybe a 1 at the end. Ats for A's.
Yeah.
Like, you might not actually be helping. Whereas if you just have a minimum 16 character password length, or even 20, even if you're using English words and a little bit of punctuation, so something's still theoretically guessable, it's so much more unguessable than an 8 character password that someone has to chuck a couple of capitals and an at in. And that's what NIST said.
Yes, exactly.
The challenge is, of course, corporates playing catch up with their 30 to freaking 90-day password policies.
Yes.
Which don't work.
That's another
and
thing
I remember debating the point with someone on this who were like, oh yes, we have to do it every 90 days. And I'm like, yeah, but why is password 2 any more secure than password 1?
Yep.
You know, and he's like, oh.
That's how people work.
That is the problem with that mentality. If you're randomly, like, so there are tools like CyberArk and stuff that can manage this stuff for you, and they'll behind the scenes rotate the password every 30 days or 90 days or every time it's used. Yep. They'll change it to something random and strong and long, not password 2 from password 1. What's he said?
Oh, no, nothing.
Don't get me. What's he said? Don't get me wrong. I don't mean for an encryption system. Or for an actual key generator. Yeah, so math.random can be, if you're just emulating, like if you're writing a video game.
It has its place.
And you just need some randomness. Math.random's fine. It's for non-cryptographic contexts. You know, you need a user ID. It's fine. I mean, if your user ID isn't a particularly secure thing, it's fine. I mean, you could use UUID as well, but UUID is probably a bit of a pain in the ass to remember if someone has to type them in.
Yeah.
So there are contexts where that level of randomness is fine, but as soon as it's for anything cryptographic, use cryptographic randomness. Session IDs containing usernames. Okay. Is it safe to append the user's username to a session ID? The session ID is 32 bytes long, generated using a secure PRNG. I encode it using base64. And save it in a HTTP cookie. The cookie value would be base64 encode random 32 bytes .username. I'm going to answer this one quite simply. All of the strength in this is
in the 32 bytes.
Yeah. The username literally makes no difference as long as it's not a vector for leakage. So it's got a HTTP only.
Yep. It could be purely just base64. The 32 random bytes, and it would probably be just as secure as it is with the random the username.
If you wanted to have the username there because a user could have multiple sessions and you wanted to log to find out which session an issue was in.
If there's a functional reason behind the scenes
and you weren't keeping this in a session database that has session and username, which is the better way to do this, then sure, I could see, say you had to hack that into a legacy system. I could see that working.
Yes.
But username by itself...
Definitely
it's a really low amount of entropy for a random value.
And a short length random string, like if that was maybe 4 or 8 bytes or something, then...
Yeah, with the username, that's
with the username, then that wouldn't be considered...
Either way, the simple one is the username provides no security to this at all. It doesn't help. Yeah. Because it's known if it's like a public forum, and if it's not known, it's... The entropy in a username is going to be so low it makes no difference.
It's base64 decodable into plain text. Like usernames are generally plain text that is easy to identify.
And when we talk about entropy here from an information sense, oh man, I put myself on the spot and I'll probably forget.
Okay.
F a duck. We're talking about randomness. So the best way I ever heard to describe this is a Shakespeare. So the entropy is in some ways the ability to guess what the next element of the thing will be. So someone said a Shakespeare play. The first 10 words have a really high amount of entropy because you don't know which Shakespeare play it is.
Okay.
This is for an algorithm.
Yep.
But for the last 10 words, the entropy is going to be very low because you're going to be like, oh yeah, that's this play. The amount you've got to match on to know what's next. You go, they're these words.
These are the last 10 words.
There is so that's the conceptually what entropy is. There is an algorithm to calculate entropy over a character set and length, and I forget what it is off the top of my head. But there are ways to calculate it as well, so you can see if something has enough entropy, or if you're looking for secrets in. So again, and the higher the entropy, the harder it is to guess what the next thing in the sequence will be.
Next, yeah.
So there are tools you can go over source code to find high entropy strings, to find passwords and stuff that shouldn't be in source code.
Like it could be a password, yeah.
The challenge with that is there's a lot of stuff that might appear to be high entropy that's not. Yeah. All you need is a UUID in your code. Heck, a URL and some domain names will have high entropy. So that's the challenge with it. It's a bit crapshooty.
Base64 sometimes can.
There's this other one that you sent me that I kind of want to.
I swear I sent it to you there.
Bear with us.
We're just looking for one more that we found very last minute.
This is our skateboarding dog one.
It's a bit of fun.
Here we are. I found it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just happened to be looking at the front page with the questions in this case.
Is there a way to hack your Facebook account?
It's been closed.
Close. This question is off topic.
Anyway, it wasn't closed when we found this question.
I think that from the title, it's pretty obvious what I'm trying to do. My Facebook account has been hacked, and it's using email from whom I've forgotten the password. I can't get it back. I'm not using this email anymore, and it's not important to me while the Facebook account is. There were no 2FA account on accounts, so it's not Spotaliza. Can someone help me in with retrieving my account back? There are a lot of important information on it, not just personal but work related. Also, can I hack it back? I've gotten to the point where I'm losing my mind. Okay,
there's a lot in this.
There's some interesting stuff here.
Yep.
Number one, if someone goes to me, I want to hack an account back.
Yep.
I would be like, can you prove you owned the original account?
In the first place? Yep.
Because, what was it like, the movies? There's a TV show you saw, it's called Leverage.
Yeah.
And I think there was a couple in there where their client was actually a crook who pretended to be beleaguered and was like, these people have stolen this from me.
Yep.
And get them on this mission, and it turns out it's because the person who's the crook is the person who was playing the victim.
Yeah.
So my gut instinct is always like, hang on a second. Is this really your account? Can you prove it?
Do you want to hear a funny story about why I'm not on Facebook?
Why?
So back when I was still maybe not in high school, just in uni, when Facebook was all the rage and I didn't know any better, I would frequently change my name on my Facebook account just for the hell of it. And one day it got blocked by Facebook, and they sent me an email saying the only way that your account will get unblocked is if you send us photocopied photo ID.
I remember this. You're at uni.
That proves who you are.
Yeah, and your name was something dumb.
I just noped out of it and said, I'm not touching this again.
Yeah. I don't have a Facebook. Well, I think I might have, but I haven't logged into it in ages. I should probably go and delete it. I've had Facebook accounts on and off, and I've deleted them every time. I don't think I deleted my last one. I should. But I don't actively use Facebook. The next thing to unpack.
Yep.
Right, so you've got this account that sounds like it's very precious to you, or this person's got an account that's very precious to them. However, the email account it's attached to isn't used anymore, and they forgot the creds.
Yep.
At that point, you should change the email account associated with your Facebook account.
Yeah, at the point where you realize that it's linked while you still have control of the Facebook account. I don't even know how hard it is to change your email address.
Yeah, I don't know if it's you have to go and click this link in your email.
Yeah.
Either way, if you've got... In fact, we'll take it a step back. If you've got email accounts associated with accounts that you care about,
you should change the email address.
If your Facebook account is important to you, then from a security perspective, your email account is as equally important as your Facebook account.
Yeah.
So if you're a serial email account collector,
and that could easily have
becomes
been
a nightmare.
How this guy got hacked in the first place. If he didn't care about his email, and he had a secure Facebook password, someone hacked his email that he don't care about, do a password reset. They send the link or the verification code or whatever to the email. Bam. Doesn't matter what his old password was.
Bish, bosh, it's game over.
I control you now.
Yeah. Yep. So, and that's And that's like and that's the thing sometimes you have to think about is like, would you buy $1 million car and then park it on the street in some ratty neighborhood unlocked?
Yeah.
No. Probably a better example would be if you're a mountain climber and you buy a very expensive harness and a very expensive rope and a $2 D-clamp, the little shackle you use to attach it. Would you do that? No. Like, you would buy a D-clamp that's also going to hold your weight. And that's the problem here is if you've got a critical asset to you, and that's kind of sometimes what we talk about in security is the concept of assets, which can be anything. A server sometimes can be an asset, or it can be the information on the server or the account or the service, or it's the thing that gives you value. If your Facebook account is important, so is the associated email account.
Yeah. The next thing here is he obviously knows about 2FA or has heard of it before, but also didn't take the time to set it up and configure it.
If it's important to you, enable it.
Yep.
These days, if it's not important to you, enable it. Yep. I mean, some people hate it, and I get that, but
it's not that much of an extra. For the amount of security it adds to an account, it's not that much of a...
Back to our OAuth thing, the advantage there, and I'm assuming Facebook might be like this too, but Google certainly is. If I try federating out to other stuff via my Google account, I'll get a notification on my phone that I have to click yes on.
Yep.
For corporate Office 365 and my personal Office 365, I get push notifications I have to approve when I'm logging in anywhere, even into federated out to another app.
Yep.
Just so using services like that can help, because then that's only one place you have to MFA.
And that's it. MFA has evolved as well beyond just here's a code that lasts 30 seconds, like you're saying.
Yeah.
The Microsoft one and even the Google one is just a drop down where you just click approve and that's all you have to do.
And then there is some level of learned context. So it might go, I trust your device. So anytime you try and log into your Google account from this device, I will trust it.
Yeah, I know that for the last year you've only ever logged in with this device. So I assume it's
I might give you a notification that you did it, but I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah.
And then the last one is...
mixing
and again, anyone who's watching this probably works in InfoSec, so they wouldn't do this. Yep. But if you're not, if you ever think I'm going to ask someone to hack something back, like...
I was thinking the mixing personal and work related.
Oh, yes, that is something I like to keep separate as well. LinkedIn might be the only exception. No, actually, but LinkedIn's professional.
LinkedIn, I would say, is work, and you wouldn't do anything personal on your LinkedIn in terms of who you network with or what you post. It's not...
I mean, if you went and looked at my Twitter account, it probably wouldn't take you, even though I don't use my real name on it, it probably wouldn't take you too long to figure out who owns the account. But that's fine. It's separated enough that if I say something dumb, like, I'd probably get in trouble at work. I will say that. But, it's not like someone's going to instantly jump to Reese, who very clearly works for this company and does all this stuff, just said something dumb. So having some degree of separation helps. Also, I used to post trolly dumb stuff. I don't do it anymore just because it's 2019. Like, the world's moved on. There's no need to be paranoid about what you post. But at the same time, there is a level of behavior expected. Like, you wouldn't walk out into, I don't know, I live in Melbourne, so that kind of Federation Square, and start slagging people off.
It's almost like an online maturity, in the same way that socially out in public you act a certain way.
Yeah, you can still have fun. You don't have to be up yourself.
Yeah,
but there's that kind of, just be careful what you do. Understand that people are looking for. Like, what was it? There was a guy who worked at a previous employer of mine who may have been caught taking pictures up women's dresses. The headline was, company here employee caught being a pervert, rather than this guy. Because it wasn't anything to do with the fact he worked at this company.
Yeah, and that's the biggest danger.
But,
mixing.
And so that's why you have to be careful with mixing work and personal. Not that you're doing that particular activity, but maybe... There is some politically sensitive activism out there.
The issue with Facebook is exactly that. Like we've seen recently in the news with all that, the Chinese government blocking people from entering the country. There was a DJ that liked a post, and all he did was like this one post, and that was enough for the country to go, you're not allowed in.
And that's an extreme example.
It's an extreme example.
I'd go, that's China for you, but
that can happen.
At the same time, there's a level of, and it's the more obvious stuff, in
the same way with work-related stuff, you might like or follow a particular political interest or something else that...
Well, and that's the classic one at the moment is someone comes out in favour of a political position. It's not necessarily that extreme. Mm-hmm. And the way the media seems to work at the moment and other people is stuff that's not inflammatory can be taken inflammatory. So you just think about what you put online. Yeah. Anyway, that's kind of less security related. Just more security. It's more compartmentalize your life.
Yeah.
And then can I hack it back? Unfortunately, in Australian law, legally, a computer crime is a computer crime, no matter the reason. Don't ask someone who works in the InfoSec to hack it back, because they'll either say no, or you're putting them at legal risk.
Yes.
Don't look on the dark web, because people will say yes and take your money. Or people will say yes and then make your life worse.
And just because you legitimately do own the account, you don't own the site or the server or the infrastructure that will actually be getting hacked.
You don't own the right to compromise Facebook.
Exactly.
You might be able to get in touch with the email provider or Facebook, email them proof of your identity, and they'll give you your account back.
Exactly.
That's the only way to go. Otherwise, it's learn the lesson and move on.
Yep.
Or just don't use Facebook.
That was my initial reaction to this, was take this as a lesson learned and ditch Facebook.
Yeah, and I mean, understanding it's not that easy for everyone. There's a lot of people who live their lives that way.
I understand it.
I still use Messenger, but just tied to my phone, because I know a lot of people who, that's the only way I can stay in touch with them. And I made a call. I'd much rather stay in touch with people than completely abstain from everything made by Facebook. There is a compromise you have to make.
I can understand that, but at the same time, it's not necessarily my stance.
No, that's fine. That's fine. We have different stances.
Yeah.
That's fine. We can agree to disagree.
Yeah, of course. And that's the whole
password cracking.
He's added password.
And then, of course, what's the actual answer? Yes, of course it is possible. And these examples that the current owner has a password, and so if you try every single password, that's an obvious answer.
You'll eventually get
this is not a feasible method nor a legal one. See?
Yeah.
Talk to Facebook.
Yeah,
and take this as a lesson and ensure you've covered basic. And that's what I'm posting here. Please refer to my previous question. And that's what this comes down to. It's just, if you go and look at password breaches, and if you know my Gmail address, which I don't really use for much anymore, but I still Hawkeye it because I use it for my Google account, and because I've got so much history associated with it. Again, sometimes you want to get rid of an email account, but there's enough history associated with it, you have to keep an eye on it.
That's the
otherwise, it could be used.
Account that I was talking to you about earlier.
Otherwise, it could be used by someone nefarious to pretend to be you and cause bad things. So I keep an eye on it, and a couple of other old ones I've got. But the email address and an old password I used for it is on the internet. It's in a breach.
Yeah.
Email address.
It's in a plain text
the
breach.
Password. Not a hash of the password, the password.
Yeah.
It wasn't that hard to find when I found it. So bear that in mind as well. The only reason why I caught it was Google, even 10 years ago, had the ability to go, you just tried logging in from Malaysia. I don't think you're in Malaysia.
Yeah.
I blocked it. And at that point, I changed my password. And ever since then, I enabled MFA, and ever since then, I've been much better at managing it. So I got off easy. I didn't have my account hijacked.
Yeah, that's pretty lucky. I haven't had any of my old ones hijacked.
I'll put it like this. My Gmail account is in 20 breaches. The account I use now, which I'm not going to say, has been a none.
Yep. Yeah, my more modern ones have not had any. my older ones have.
Yeah. And I do use aliases for services that I think are SaaS, so that if they're ever breached, I can be like, I know who did it.
Yes, I do that as well.
That's the thing. I manage my own email. If you manage your own email, it's a great little fun exercise.
Yeah, a catch-all or aliases.
Even Gmail, you can use the plus to shove an extra info so that you know.
Proton Mail's the same. You can use the plus and all the same tricks with Proton Mail if you're not into Google.
These are just handy ways to and at the end of the day, security is your own responsibility, and you're trusting that these providers know what they're doing, and you can give that trust out carefully by limiting the scope, or you can go whole hog. That's your choice. But you're trusting them, and if they get breached, I agree, there's liability on them, but you're the only one who's ever impacted by it.
Yes.
And that's where it kind of comes back to being on you, and you're the only one who can do anything about it. So that's why you should always be careful out there, There's no need to be paranoid. I mean, there's a good chance North Korea is not out for you, or Iran. But, I think the criminals tend to just look for whoever's the weakest. And if you're not the weakest, you're fine.
Yep.
And that's...
You would be surprised at the conversations you have with people or even companies that say, but we don't see or we don't know why anyone would target us. And that's their security model.
Yeah. And...
We don't really do anything specifically around security because we don't think we'll be a target.
And there are companies that really should have in their threat model that they are a target.
Yep.
And then there are companies, look at these CryptoLocker attacks. They had no reason to suspect anyone had it out for them, because, I'm not a piñata for money.
Yep.
Unlike a bank or a company that accepts payments where you can steal credit cards and sell the credit cards, a hospital doesn't really have any obvious ways to make money from it unless you encrypt all their files and then all of a sudden go pay us some money to get our files back. And then they'll pay, and that's how you get money out of them. And so the bad guys have an economic approach, an economic mindset, and economic motivation. You think about it in terms of a business, and all of a sudden you start to go, oh, I could see them doing that, I could see them doing that. And it's one of the things in security, plenty of people think about this. But there are some people in security who get so down to it's about the tech or it's about targeting individuals, when really it's just business for so many people.
Yeah.
So... yeah, on that note, it's probably finish time.
Yeah, that's a decent stream, I think.
It's a good chat. It was good fun. We'll probably do something technical next time.
Yeah, hopefully.
Are you in Melbourne next week?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we'll probably be doing it from Munnigan next week.
Yes, we probably
and
will.
Then, I'm going to have a quick squiz at your calendar.
I think it's the week
Okay,
after.
so Tuesday's a Christmas Eve.
Oh, not quite. Okay.
If you're not doing anything on Christmas Eve... I'm not planning on doing any... I might have a dinner. We might not stream... So we're taking a new approach. We used to stream on Thursdays if we weren't going to do a Tuesday.
Yeah.
Now we're just going to skip a week if we're unable to do it.
Tuesday, yeah.
Next year, we're also going to have a bit of a forward plan of what we do when. We publish it somewhere and goes what we're doing when, so that we can say in advance the weeks we won't be streaming.
Yeah.
Hopefully doing some more stuff, like some actual videos and bits and pieces as well.
Sometimes something a bit more casual or conversational like this.
Yeah, this is nice. It's laid back. Don't have to pray to the demo gods.
Yeah.
And then the 30. So New Year's Eve. I wonder how many people will get it. I mean, I don't give a stuff about New Year's Eve, but
I don't care either.
Wonder how many people will stream then.
I'm gonna sound like such an old man, but I can't remember the last New Year's I stayed awake for.
I think it was 3-4 years ago for me that I stayed up for. So, yeah, but I'll be in actually I'll be in Queensland then, and on the 7th, so there'll be 2 streams
for all of them.
Yeah, and then I think all good. Rightio, everyone. Have a good one.
Talk to you later.
Cheers.